Hi, this is Brian Forrester, and everything that you'll see in this video is in my new book, Lost Ancient Technology of Egypt, Volume 2, at Amazon.com. Now, everything you're going to see in this video could not have been done by the dynastic Egyptians, such as the lid of this granite box. You can see those striations, which are clearly saw marks, and there's no way that that was a copper saw or bronze saw with silica sand being used, because silica sand is about the same hardness as the granite itself. So it had to have been a saw of a harder material, likely diamond, or possibly something even more exotic than that. This is located in a dark corner of the museum in Cairo, likely because the authorities don't want you to see it, but there it is. And then we also have other large stone boxes that some people call sarcophagi, but this one's intriguing in that it was damaged during its construction. You notice the two circular saw marks there? And so obviously this was a series of two powered saws parallel to one another that were running, and then accidentally the saw blade on top began to cut deeper into the box and caused the lid to simply snap off. And so whoever was making the box simply abandoned the project. You can also notice that the front of the saw blade is thinner than the sides, which is quite curious. And I'm sure all of you have seen at least photographs of this, which is called the Schist Disc, located in the Cairo Museum. It's about 2 to 2.5 feet in diameter, and unfortunately it was badly repaired by the authorities. It was found at Saqqara, along with 30,000 to 40,000 turned hard stone bowls. Now you see the three lobes on it. They're not angled, so it's not as if it was pushing or pulling water. It clearly rotated around the central axis, but what its original function was is unknown. It is not what the authorities call a lotus bowl. Obviously, it's a piece of some kind of machine. And these are some of the turned bowls, very, very hard stone. Again, there are not 30 or 40 of them, but between 30,000 and 40,000 of them were found at Saqqara by the archaeologist Emery. And again, that's also where the schist disc was found, in a cache under one of the pyramids. And what this thing was, I have no idea, but I can tell you that the stone is quartzite, which is 7 out of 10 in terms of hardness, so it could not have been made by the dynastic Egyptians, and it shows curious burn marks on it. And now this is the top of a very large granite box, and here you can clearly see tube drill holes. Again, this could not have been achieved by copper or bronze drill bits with sand being used as an abrasive. And now we're at Abydos, and this is the enigmatic Osirion, located underground. It was rediscovered in the 19th century. Large quartzite blocks in the background, and then the square pillars that you see here in the foreground are granite, which likely came from Aswan, which is several hundred miles away. And the blocks weigh up to 60 tons apiece. And it looks like catastrophic damage happened here as well. So we'll see lots of examples of ancient catastrophic damage, not done by invading armies, but by natural events. And the somewhat famous light bulbs of Dendara. Were they actual light bulbs? They look very much like what are called Crookes tubes, but nobody honestly knows what they originally were. An example of electricity? Maybe, but unknown. And now we're at Luxor, and compare the size of the people walking with those giant seated figures. Originally, those figures each were made out of one solid piece of stone, either syenite or granite, and they could not have been made by the dynastic Egyptians. And this huge obelisk, which is also located at Luxor, one solid piece of granite. It could very well be that the hieroglyphs were added later during dynastic times. And now we're at Saqqara. And Saqqara is a huge ancient site. That is the pyramid of Djoser in the background, likely one of the earliest of the pyramids, based on the dynastic Egyptians studying the Great Pyramid, which preceded the dynastic Egyptians. And look at the size of this shaft, of which there are many, located at Saqqara, deep in the bedrock. And this is quite curious and could be cataclysm heat evidence. Notice the color of the limestone tends to be kind of whitish, but the upper layers are yellow and even brown and black, as if heat had been applied in the distant past. And now let's go underground. This, I believe, is called the Pyramid of Tea. Was recently opened to the public. And as we're going down, you see the rubble on the left, which probably is dynastic work, and then these beautiful, almost perfectly flat blocks of limestone. And as we descend further down, this was in March of 2018. As we walk back through, these giant slabs are granite, once again, likely from Aswan. And the exterior of the pyramid, again, which I have in another video, shows cataclysmic heat damage, as if the casing stone was literally burnt and blown off the surface. And now also at Saqqara, we look down. This is a dynastic period shaft of some kind. Where the staircases go, I don't know, but they probably lead to an underground system of ancient tunnels. Look at the rather poor craftsmanship of the dynastic pyramid. And then as we walk along, we're going to see another shaft, and this shaft again goes down into the bedrock itself. So it's highly likely that this was achieved using high technology. There's the dynastic period work, and now we're going into the shaft itself. Farther down, you can see that's bedrock. And also at Saqqara, we have a fascinating place. Again, look at the upper surfaces of the bedrock. It appears to have been burnt by heat in ancient times. And now we're going through the tunnel system. And this tunnel system again was carved into the bedrock. There are two parallel tunnels. This is the main one, which has several niches, inside of which are giant stone boxes. Each one of these boxes averages 100 tons. The box itself is 70 tons, the lid being 30 tons. Again, the stone came most likely from Aswan, several hundred miles to the south. As we walk along further through, we'll see very crude hieroglyphics, unfinished, on the box, and academics still insist that the box and the hieroglyphics are contemporary with one another, but the hieroglyphics are very poor, unfinished, and the box is astonishing and beautifully polished. Again, the crappy nature of the hieroglyphics we can see, and the very smooth, polished nature of one of these massive boxes. Once again, averaging 100 tons and coming from Aswan, most likely, hundreds of miles away. And as we walk through the other tunnel, parallel to the first one, this is an unfinished box, and this tells us a lot, because this shows us that quite possibly the roughing out of the box was done outside on the surface, and then in this unfinished state was brought into the tunnel and then taken to its niche where quite likely the finishing work would have been done. The problem is there was no light in the distant past in these tunnels. There's no sunlight that penetrates, and there's no soot marks on the ceiling to tell us that this was dynastic period work. And there is the lid of the box, which would have preceded the movement of the box itself. We're now at Tanis, which is located in the Nile Delta of northern Egypt. And again, this is quartzite, and notice the powerful heat effect on the right-hand side. As well, the stone seems to have been blown off in some cases. Everything found at Tanis, in general, was found underground. This is likely a dynastic period reconstruction of massive blocks that were found at Tanis. And look at the size of that huge slab on the left. Again, the stone probably came from the Aswan quarry, which is about 700 miles away. And there again, quartzite with what looks like scorching. Now this is what's left of a quartzite statue, and you can see as we get up close that the surfaces were melted by some intense heat. Tanis is one of the most bizarre locations on the planet. And here we see remnants destroyed of up to 15 massive obelisks. And every piece of stone at Tanis is broken, not through human intervention, but likely from a giant cataclysm in the very distant past. The site was probably found by the dynastic Egyptians, and here again quartzite with heat scorching. Well, now we've returned to the Giza Plateau area. The Sphinx is right behind this guy. There you can see its head. And today, or now, we're exploring the Osiris Shaft that has only been open to the public for about 2 years. You can only enter this with special permission, and our group, I believe, paid somewhere in the region of $2,000 to $3,000 for 2 hours inside, but it was absolutely incredible, as you can see on his face. So we're walking in, and we're walking straight into the bedrock itself. And now we're going to look down to the first level underground, and the ladder takes you down approximately 30 feet into a chamber carved out of the bedrock. And now we've gone down the second level, which is another 100 feet down into the bedrock. Luckily, they've replaced the ladders because the one on the right is a little bit suspect. But the newer ladders are actually quite sturdy, and it's well worth it if you go to Egypt. We'll be going back in April 2019, and that tour sold out in July of 2018. Now, in the second level, there are 6 niches, and there are 2 boxes. This one has a strange black goo on the surface that I'm going to take samples of in April 2019 to test and see what kind of material it is, whether it's organic or not. So here we're in the second level, and finally, this is Yusuf Awiyan. In the third level, it's down a further 60 feet, so that means the Osiris Shaft, as far as we can tell, goes at least 200 feet into the bedrock. He grew up across the street from the Sphinx, and this was the first time he had ever been in the Osiris Shaft. And finally, this is showing you the weathering of the Sphinx enclosure. You see the vertical weathering had to have been the result of precipitation, and so far at least 200 geologists have stated it has to be water erosion, and that means that the Sphinx enclosure was carved out at least 8,000 to 10,000 years ago, and that is at least a few thousand years before the existence of the dynastic Egyptians. And finally, something you get to see if you go inside the enclosure is the fact that there is an access point near the back of the rump, and there's a ladder inside, taking you under the Giza Plateau.